the wrong button by accident. But we are going to be going live with Adanna Moriarty to talk about her book, Threadbare, A Patchwork of Poems That Make a Life. It debuts January 15th, and we're all so very excited about this. I don't know what happened to the last live video, but we are back. We're ready to go and talk about this amazing and wonderful collection. As I was saying, Adanna was one of the first people that applied or that submitted to Curious Corbett when we got started, and I was so touched by her poetry, and I knew that it just needed to get out into the world. And I was so happy when she decided to make Curious Corbett Publishing her home. So she's going to be joining us. We're going to talk about her collection and answer some questions that we had left for her on our Instagram page. So as soon as we get her in here. Oh, no, you're fine.
Okay.
It's so good to see you.
You too.
I'm so excited to talk about your book.
Oh, I don't know if I am, but I am excited to talk about my book.
We'll get there. No worries. We have been working so hard on this book, getting everything ready for it. It's such a beautiful collection of poetry from start to finish. I mean, the outside is beautiful, the inside is beautiful. I'm going to read the summary for it really quick. Love, loss, grief, and growth are knit together in this uniquely moving collection from Adanna Moriarty. Feel life flash before you as we follow Adanna on the path of her own. From childhood wonder to young adult freedoms to budding motherhood and the tragic loss of a parent. Woven with a love only loss could know, each piece brings a nostalgic comfort, causing the reader to ponder the threads of their own life. Moriarty thoughtfully narrates her shift in child to woman and examines the hardest of topics in an honest and gentle way. In doing so, her story is not only relatable, but also softens the things we find most difficult to discuss: mental health, adapting to change, and the quiet tragedy of death. This is a collection readers will return to again and again for comfort, for validation, and for the nostalgia of a life well lived.
A good summary of it.
When I first read your collection, when it came through Curious Corbett Publishing, I was just touched by the honesty that you put and just the vulnerability of everything about who you are, talking about your life and the way that you've grown and changed as a person and just overcome so many different things. It was just really beautiful, and I felt you had a really unique voice to offer the poetry community in general.
Well, thank you for that.
Yes, absolutely. And you've been a joy to work with too and get to know. So we are going to dive into these questions that people left you on Instagram. So we put up a post a week ago saying if you would like to win a copy of Adanna's book, you could leave her a message in the comments below and be entered into a drawing to win. So we're going to go through and answer all of those questions that you guys left for her. So the first question that we had was written by Shannon. And she asked, how do you approach discussing death and grief with your child or children?
Well, I mean, all my children are upper teenagers. So, when my dad died, it wasn't like talking to little kids about it. So it wasn't really that hard. I mean, we've all just kind of gone through this together. And we talk about stuff anyway. I mean, I like with my daughter, she's 19. I've always talked to her about stuff, like whatever it is as it comes up. I've never like tried to hide that from her, whatever those things are. So, I mean, I think it's different when they're really little, and you have to navigate that per child, where they're at developmentally and all that kind of stuff. So, but I don't know. I mean, it's a weird process. Like everybody goes through it different. Everybody experiences it different.
Yeah.
I think like even my siblings and I haven't had the same experience over the course of the last year. even though we lost the same person.
Right. It's one of those things that is just very, very, very personal. It's like it's a very personalized tragedy to go through a loss like that.
Yeah.
Our next question was from the Musing Palette, and she asked, grief is such a weighted topic to discuss and varied in each reaction, much like we were just saying. Did you find it difficult to write to your audience, or did you stay true to your own process of grief?
So this book specifically, it didn't start out with an audience in mind. It was really my way of dealing with what was going on. Um, it actually had a friend who, she had lost her dad about 5 months before my dad went into the hospital. Um, and when my dad was in the hospital, I reached out to her and I was like, were there books? Like, what did you do? Like, and she said, I started writing poetry and I wrote them on everything at, receipts in my purse. And I'd always used poetry as a way to journal. Like, I've been good at the long form journaling. And so poetry has always been a really private place for me. I never shared it with anybody. And so when my dad was sick, it was really just my way of processing it. And then I had another person say I should take this and turn it into a chapbook and submit it to Button Poetry because they do that chapbook competition every January. And, so it was it escalated. But yeah, I mean, even in the process of once I started building on like the actual grief poems, um, I don't think I ever really had an audience in mind. I hope that as I was writing, it would resonate with people.
Yeah.
The further I got along with it and the more that I shared, the more that I realized that it did. And that there are pieces of it that it's not just a book about grief. I mean, it's not just it's not 100 and whatever, 70 pages, my dad dying. That would be a bummer. Um, so yeah, so as it built into a story, because that's how I look at it from beginning to end, that it's a story of my life. Like I started calling it a memoir in poetry. That's kind of, but it never really had an audience. So I always just spoke myself into it.
I think that's one of the things that makes it so powerful and beautiful is that there's so much of you in it when you read through, and it makes it just, I think, come alive and just more real. If what you're writing is superficial, then it's not going to hit home the same way.
I
Our next, oh,
I don't know if, and like, I think it's really hard. Well, for me anyway, it's really hard to write superficial poetry. Because I think poetry comes from a different place than other kind of writing does. So I think there's generic poetry, but I don't know if any of it is really superficial.
I agree with that. Yeah, I do. So our next question came from Evocations of Eric, and they asked, what was the first piece you have ever written regarding death?
Okay, so I actually have sat and thought about this all day, and I picked out a poem to read, which was one of the first ones that I wrote. I can't remember exactly. I tried to go back and look at dates, like of what was the first one, when I knew that, because this process actually started before my dad died, because it was just so obvious. I mean, like that he was not going to leave the hospital. And so I picked out a poem to read. That was one of the first ones that I wrote in this process. So I don't know if people want to hear it.
We absolutely do want to hear it.
Okay. This is from my copy. That is not the final copy. So hopefully this one didn't need to be edited. All right, so I dare you, Earth, to take me raw, broken, for my tears create your oceans. I have pain for you to swallow me whole with. I have love to be ejected into the stratosphere like volcanic lava from the depths of you. I have this vapidness to be set adrift and carried out to sea from your raging river spidering out across you. I have a child that dwells deep inside, who needs your forest to envelop her, to be knitted into the strength of your roots. I have rage to be breathed into the wind, cocooned in frozen glaciers that hold the ancients. I have sadness for the great sandstorms to radiate across the desert, magnifying the heat, smothering everything in its path. I dare you, Earth, to take me this raw, this broken, this bitter. I dare you, Earth, to take me, swath my soul in your womb, and let me rain back down with hurricane force until I have sucked your oceans dry again. I dare. Only then can I be healed.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh, that is beautiful. I love all of the imagery you put into that. Oh, that's so pretty. That's and so powerful too.
Um, so like that whole section of my dad, because it was summer, while he was in the hospital, he died August 2nd. And so I actually created the kind of the rest of the theme of the book, like of, taking nature and turning it into how I felt emotionally. So there are a lot of poems in his section of the book, because the book's sectioned, um, that really are like taken moments that were happening, like we had forest fires, and there's a poem about like the sky being on fire, and but I took all of those natural things that were happening around me and wove them into my emotional state.
I think that that's beautiful. I think that just being able to reach out and take pieces of your world and put them into what it is that you're writing is just incredibly it's a gift. It is. It's an art to do it and to do it so gracefully. Because when you read those things, it's like you're right there in those words. You're feeling those emotions and you're seeing those things happen right in front of you. And it's a real gift to be able to create something like that. That's beautiful. Our next question was from Spilling Grace, and she asked, "Who are your influences as a writer?"
Okay, so this is another one that I have been thinking about. I actually read that one days ago, and I was like, who are my influences as a writer? I think there are a lot of writers that I admire. I don't know if any of them actually influence how I write or how I go about writing. I would say if I had to pick one, it would be Margaret Atwood, because um, not so much for her writing style, but for her varying forms, because she writes nonfiction, she writes dystopian fiction, she writes historical fiction, she writes beautiful poetry. The first book she ever published, the book of poetry. So I mean, I would say that if I were to be influenced by another writer, it would be Margaret Atwood. Another writer that I really, really admire, and not because I like his work, because I don't, but for his discipline and for what he does, is Stephen King. Because Stephen King amazes me that he writes on holidays, he writes on birthday, he writes if he doesn't feel good. He writes at least 4 hours every day of his life. And he averages the writing process takes 3 months, and the editing process takes him 3 months. And that is how he puts out so many books. And so, yeah. And then, I mean, of course, there are just writers out there that you love deeply and have changed your world and changed your life. But yeah, those are um, my two super admiring authors.
I appreciate that. I think that that's really neat. I love that Stephen King is one of them because I don't think Stephen King has ever written poetry, at least
No,
not that I'm aware of.
And I really I really like I don't really go in for horror. And it's just not my thing. I don't like to be scared. But I really do appreciate what he does. I think he has really good advice for other writers. Like if you're a writer out there, I highly suggest reading On Writing by Stephen King. I think that it's a really great it's to know that his journey has not been easy. I mean,
Right.
he was rejected. He's had to fight to be where he is. Like he just never gave up. Um, and and Margaret Atwood, as a woman, being published with poetry in the 60s, is also a really amazing thing because it was hard to be published as a woman. And poetry has always been, unless you're languishing around in Victorian England, poetry has always kind of been this like, yeah, we have to read it in high school.
I like it. That's really cool. So, our next question is from the Loch Jess Monster. And they ask, how did you know you were finally ready to publish?
Um, all right. Thanks, Jesse, for this one. She's a friend of mine. um, I didn't. I so the reason part of the reason the outside that was not me that this book came to be was a year ago, well, a little over a year ago, in late October, I joined the Community Literature Initiative, and they are a group that it's 2 semesters, and you write poetry, you write a book, and then you go through all of the process a book and querying publishing houses and all of that to published. That happened in June, late May, early June, that these books had to be complete. We had deadlines that we had to meet. I work really well in a deadline. I would probably write way more books if I had a deadline for every project I had going. And I wasn't sure. I didn't know if it was ready. I don't know if as an author, even if you have 60 books out there, if you're ever 100% sure that what is going to your publisher or whatever, like before it's published, is ready. And it wasn't 100% ready. We've had to do some work on it to get it finished and cleaned up and ready for people to be able to purchase it. So, the the book making, the whole part of it, it's like having a baby. You spend, months and months, sometimes years brewing it, and I don't know. I'm still not 100% sure it's ready to be published. It is. It's beautiful. It's so
It
beautiful.
is beautiful. It is beautiful. It's hard when you want it all to be perfect. You put so much of yourself into it and you spend all of this time creating and brainstorming and perfecting and making sure it is the best version of itself that it can possibly be. And can be exhausting sometimes.
I know. I had this joke, through the early stage editing process, like, once it had all of its pages, and then, you have to go through it a million times. And, you get to a point where you're like, I don't see anything wrong. And then you hand it to someone else and they're like, oh, all these things. And I was like, man, I don't know if I have a real book, as I call them, in me, because the editing process for a poetry book was intense.
Mhm.
When you have 90,000 words to go through, it's daunting.
I saw a thing on Twitter and it was the perfect way to ruin your own book is to publish it. Don't look at it for like 2 months and then pick it up and open it to a random page one day, and there will be that one mistake that you didn't find.
I know. And I mean, I find it in, mass produce, like, from the big publishing houses, I find errors all the time. And the amount of eyeballs that have been on those and they still slip through. I mean, editing is, I just think you can have 5 different people go over it a bazillion times and everybody gets sick of looking at it. You start skimming. uh,
So, one thing I really loved about your collection is the storytelling. And we've talked a little bit about this already, that your book is it's just a big story, the story of your life and the things that you've been through. But you bring life to each piece, which makes it like we're experiencing it as well. We're walking along with you as you go. So, with this storytelling that you've created through your poetry, is that something that you grew into, or was it just one of those things that you kind of always had since you came into the world?
I like to think it's something I've always had. I mean, when I was little, I had a pretty big imagination. I had lots of imaginary friends. I was always making up songs and stories. And, you know, um, I had early influence. My my mom's boyfriend when I was little, his sister-in-law is an author. She's like a New York Times bestselling author, and she always encouraged me. When we were together as a family to put together little books and stuff like that. My dad was always a big time cheerleader for my storytelling ability. Um, so I mean, I like to say that I came out like that. I think my mom is here. She could probably answer it better. um, but yeah, I mean, I've always had um, a love of history. I like where things come from. Either us as individuals or society as a whole. I'm fascinated by those stories that get all of us to where we are today, from the beginning of time. So I think that it was kind of, I've always been inquisitive. When I was in preschool, I broke my leg. We were in a car accident and I broke my
Oh,
leg.
wow.
And my preschool teacher, while I was out, because I couldn't be at school, she made me all these books. They're called Little Miss Y books. They were like 5 pages. I have one of them still. But I guess she made a whole series because I just asked why endlessly. And I'm still that person as an adult. And I think those two things are where stories come from, the why.
Yes, definitely. Poetry and storytelling they're really lovely companions. And the ability to carry a story from start to finish through poetry is just an incredible talent. It's an art. But have you ever considered writing short stories or novels or going into that with your storytelling?
I have. I never planned. I don't actually weirdly really consider myself a poet, because poetry is always a really private thing for me. The first time I ever shared anything was when I auditioned for CLI, Community Literature Initiative, because you have to try out. You have to take 3 of your poems and read them in an interview, and they accept you or not on the merit of how you have written. And that was the first time I ever read a poem out loud, that I
Wow.
ever shared it with, outside of my family or my friends. And even with my friends, I never really shared. It's a very closed circle. Um, so I mean, my plan has always been since I was like 8 years old to write some epic novel, that sells a bajillion copies and gets made into movies. And I mean, that's always the dream, right?
That
Um,
is the dream.
so
Definitely.
I mean, right now I'm working on 2 separate stories. One is a memoir, an actual memoir, not in poetry, an actual long form memoir, about the year I was 17 and a runaway in Phoenix, Arizona. And then the other one is a dystopian story that was a, given to me by my dad. We were having a random conversation about how in the 1950s the Catholic Church had this program that was called Saving Pagan Babies, essentially. I don't think that's what it's
Interesting.
called, but they were like baptizing kids that hadn't been baptized Catholic. And it sparked this whole big time dystopian world for me. And that's kind of all I'm going to say on that because
Oh, that sounds interesting.
it has about 10 pages and I think they're from the middle of the book. I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, I write professionally. I just wrote an article this week. So, I mean, writing is kind of what I've always wanted to do.
That's really neat. I love that. When you write about your personal stories and experiences, it can be really vulnerable. And so, like you said, when you read your poetry for the first time, that had to be like a total experience to go from nothing to auditioning. Um, so
It
when
was
you
scary, like grow up worthy scary. I was so nervous.
when you did you find it therapeutic to put this collection together? And did it make you nervous at all when you decided to share it with the world?
Yes to both of that. It was definitely therapeutic. There were so many times while I was working on the book where I felt like I was not grieving my father enough properly. And by the time the whole thing was complete, and it had become this exploration of kind of who we are before, during, and after you lose a parent, um, because that's what it is. I mean, it's a story of my life, but it's really um, segmented by the death of my father, who I was before, and you know, who I am after. And so, yeah, it's deeply vulnerable. Um, in so many ways, it's scary to put out there in the world, because once we let go of it, it becomes its own beast, right? I
Right.
mean, I don't get to tell people how to interpret it. I mean, it's for everybody that reads it. It's going to be different for everybody because we're all different people, and poetry is like that. I don't think poetry
Yes.
hits be the same. Whether it's Shakespeare or it's spoken word or whatever, because we all come from different places and different experiences and, all of that. But yeah, I mean, it's vulnerable, it's scary. It was really therapeutic. And by the time it was done, I realized that, um, you know, I grieved him through the whole process of it and exploring myself. And I think it made it less painful in a way. I was maybe more introspective than I would have been if I hadn't decided to do this. And, I think that he'd be into it. So I think that, you know, I've struggled this week with missing him because, like, I really would like him to be able to hold my book and read my book and, tell me how great I am. But yet this book wouldn't be here if he was here. So, it's kind of a weird, bittersweet moment this entire week has been for me. But yeah, I think I came out the other side of it better. Like, I don't know how the past year would have gone if I hadn't decided to write this book. That's
I
why,
really,
oh,
oh,
that's
go
why
ahead.
advice to everybody is even if you're not a writer, like when you go through something big, emotionally traumatic like this, something unexpected, and you're like, I don't know how to do this. My advice to you is to write whatever. It doesn't have to be poetry. It doesn't have to be pages and pages. It can just be how in that moment when you're feeling overwhelmed, like write it out. because I think that writing is therapeutic, even if you think you're not good at it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I know whenever I'm writing and I write through something that is hurting me or that has been, traumatic or whatever, I always kind of feel like it's pulled out of me and it gets stuck in the ink that ends up on the pages. And so you kind of separate yourself from it while still being a part of it in this weird way. And it's just very freeing and very healing. And I have no doubts that your dad has been watching you through this whole process, and I have no doubts that he's incredibly proud of you for what you have done and this beautiful thing you've created. And I have no doubts that it's going to be one of those collections that is going to be so meaningful to a lot of people who have experienced the same way, who maybe didn't know how to express themselves or didn't know how to process it, and you've been able to give them a voice into that.
That ultimately is what became my goal with this book. Like when I started really like trying to shape it, was that I didn't want it to just be about my dad. Um, I thought, anything over than maybe like 20 pages chapbook size of death, dying, and grief was, it was a bummer. And I don't want people to leave my book like that. I want them to leave with feeling, you know, seen and heard, and that, even when we feel alone or we're depressed or, whatever, that there are other people out there that have had those same feelings. And I hope that that comes across in my book, the awkward shy child, the overly rambunctious teenager that, really put my mother through hell. Um, um, who has also always been immensely supportive of me. Um, the 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 young adult who has struggled with, body image, depression, and anxiety, and all of those things. I like my goal was to hopefully leave people feeling um, okay.
Yeah.
Like this is how I feel, and it's okay, and that there are brighter days, and that there are that come out of those moments when, we feel adrift.
Yes, absolutely.
Adrift moments are actually things that bring us to ground.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that very much so. It's been so nice working on this collection, making it real, and now here it is. It's real. Our publishing date is just around the corner. It's available now worldwide for pre-orders. And yeah, it's just been so exciting to see it all come together from
Yeah,
the very beginning.
it has been. I had a great interior layout designer, who's my friend Donna Lloyd. We worked so closely on putting the interior together, and I think we literally worked up on it until Christmas week. I mean, we've just been fidgeting and trying to make it perfect. And so when the final copies are printed and you open it, my hope is that people go, oh, that's so pretty.
I have no doubts. I have no doubts. All of the people that have pre-ordered through Curious Corvid Publishing, your books will be out to you really soon. Right now, they're on their way to Adanna to be signed, and then they'll be back to me, and they'll be getting shipped out to you right away. So you won't have to wait too terribly long. Um, but we had our drawing. We have our questions. Would you like to pick a name for the copy of your book?
um, I don't remember all the names, so you can pick one.
Okay, I did write that. I have that on my computer, like one of those random name shufflers, just in case. So I'm gonna click the button, and it's gonna do its thing, and it's the Musing Palette. So
Yay.
congratulations to the Musing Palette. You won a copy of Adanna's book, and I'll reach out to them and get all their information so that I can get it sent out to them when we get them.
Cool.
But yes, I've really enjoyed talking with you about your book, and
Yeah.
it's going to be just beautiful. So everyone, I thank you so much for tuning in to talk to Adanna and listen to her about her beautiful book. It is available worldwide through Amazon, Kindle, all major bookstores, and you can get a signed copy through Curious Corbett Publishing. So I encourage you to check out this collection. It is beautiful, it's heartwarming, and it's just like one of those warm hugs you've been waiting for. So thank you so much for Adanna for taking some time to talk with me tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I'm really excited for people to be able to have my book in their hands and read it. And I hope that it helps you be strong when you don't feel strong.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your night, a wonderful rest of your week. Remember, we may be different species, but we're all part of the same family. So be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and we will see you really soon.
Vermilion bleeds into my soul, cascades around me like a strange euphoric dream. Heat pulses up through my feet, and at last I know I'm free.